Hi everyone, welcome to a new devlog. In this episode, we'll see how I've tackled the level design for mines and dungeons, and the implementation of new systems to make levels more fun. So let's get started! When I started with the level design, I felt lost and overwhelmed. I needed to figure out where to start. One of my goals was to design the levels in a modular way, so I could reuse the models to create different environments. In this case, the design was for the first abandoned mine that the player will find on his way. The way I approached the challenge was to think about the functionality that a mine will have in the real world. Secondly, the goals I wanted for the player. And thirdly, the fun. With this in mind, I began designing the mines by sketching out the general structure of the building. The structure includes the architecture of the mine and its different parts, such as tunnels, caves, storage rooms, etc. Once I had the structure of the level clearly defined, I could move on to the next step. The story of the game is essential for the level design. These mines are not the goal of any quest, but nevertheless hide a very important item that will reward those who want to explore. This is where the second part comes into play. The goal for the player. As I said, in this level, the goal is to reward the player for going into and exploring the mines. Once I establish where I want to locate the item, I design the flow that I like the player to follow. For this, I use points of interest that would draw the attention of the player, directing him to where I intended. Then, I can think about the third part, the fun. For this, I have designed encounters with enemies, and challenges such as broken bridges or collapsed walls that the player must overcome. In the end, the level design is a layered design inspired by real-world functionalities, the story of the game, the goals for the player, and last but not the least, the fun. So far, it's all pretty theoretical, but how do we start? Well, I decided to design the level in Blender, since I feel more comfortable moving geometry in Blender than in Unreal. The first thing was to set the reference unit. In this case, it's a 6x6 meter cell. Using this cell, I build the rest of the structures, like the floor, walls, bridges, etc. Using a unit reference helps create consistent levels. For the preliminary design, I use placeholders that I will later replace with real models. It's essential to mention that I iterate between Blender and Unreal to evaluate the spaces, to see if the character and the camera move well, and to make changes accordingly. One of the most complex elements of the level design is the stairs, since in video games, they are usually more prominent than in real life. When creating stairs, it's very important to take into account the height of the step and the inclination of the stairs, so the player moves smoothly and the camera doesn't bump into the walls. I'll leave a link to an interesting video that explains what to take into account when designing stairs. As I mentioned before, it's crucial to test the level in Unreal to ensure that the spaces are wide and everything flows naturally. Once the level is blocked, I can implement new mechanics for the challenges. In the world I have created for my game, the primary source of energy is the energy stone. The stone generates electricity when inserted into the energy generator. The generator is used for lights, activating mechanisms, etc. The bridges of the mines are drawbridges, and the mechanism that raises and lowers the bridge works with energy stone. Part of the challenge is to find that valuable stone to activate the mechanism. The system warns us if we don't have the energy stone and gives us a little hint. Once we have the stone, we can return to the bridge and activate the mechanism. This mechanic contributes to diversifying the levels and making them more attractive. Another mechanic that I created is the system of gangways. Sometimes the levels will be collapsed or semi-destroyed, and the only way to get to the other side will be with a gangway. The player will have to look for something to help him overcome the obstacle, a plank, a ladder, etc. This mechanism is strongly influenced by another video game. Could you tell me which one? The biggest challenge of this mechanic was the animations. The animations I use are from the marketplace, and the closest to what I needed for this mechanic were the ones for picking up objects from the ground. These animations were not designed to pick up large things, so planks or ladders that are too long go through the player's mesh for a few frames. To solve this aesthetic problem without creating new animations, I use a trick I have seen in the making of other games. At the beginning of the animation, I make a sudden camera change. This change of point of view distracts the player and hides the flaws of the animation, so we don't notice that the plane went through the character or the floor. Finally, I had added stackable items. These objects can be energy stones, food, potions, etc. In my game, the inventory is simple by design, but I wanted to save real estate when we have the same item over and over again. So now identical items are stacked automatically, simplifying the inventory and making it look better. The UI is still using placeholders. And that was all the progress so far. The answer to my question about which other game inspired the Gangway mechanic is Last of Us. I bet many of you already figured it out. In case you didn't know, Last of Us, God of War and The Witcher are my sources of inspirations for the mechanics and narrative of this game, keeping the distances, of course. As always, thank you very much for watching. See you soon in the next devlog.